Well, I'll share my screen in a minute. I want to introduce my colleagues. I'm Pam Rabin. I'm a coordinator for educational technology at the County Office of Ed, and I'm going to let my colleagues unmute and welcome you and tell you their names as well.
I can go next. I'm Jessica Sierra. I'm an ed tech TOSA with the county office.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Garcia. I am an educational coordinator, ed tech coordinator here at the San Diego County Office of Education.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Lane. I'm a specialist with the Educational Technology Department.
Hi, I'm David Sosa, Principal San Pasquale Academy at County Office.
Hi, David. Jessica, did you want to introduce yourself or did you already do that? Sorry.
Oh, I thought I did. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah, she did. She's good.
My apologies. I think I was getting something ready to go, but David, it's nice to see you. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and start. As it's come to my attention that the bit.ly link that we had for that is not exactly right. So I think Carrie's now re-putting in the link to the presentation. So again, this series, last time people joined us, we were talking around ed tech and equity issues that had to do a lot with access to the technology, access to broadband, and just do you have the computers in your hand. And today we're kind of delving into this world of AI, artificial intelligence, and what all that has to do with some equity issues that might start or kind of exist already, but that you might start hearing about in schools as well. So I am going to share my screen now. Let me know if you can't see it. And I want to let you know as well that we will be recording this. So if you don't want to be having your image on the screen, feel free to turn off your cameras. You should get a little notification that we are going to be recording. And hopefully you are seeing my screen. Thumbs up if you can see it. All right. So let me move through these slides. Our objectives for today are really to talk a little bit. If you are not familiar with AI, we have some brief overview definitions of what is artificial intelligence, and kind of we try and narrow it back down into the educational realm. So we'll start a little broad and we'll move our way into what does it really have to do with education. We're going to give you some examples of artificial intelligence in educational settings and sort of ask you within a parameters that we're going to give you, what do you think about these? What do you see? We have a few examples. Why AI is still important for us to look at. And then we have a little call to action for everyone. What can you do knowing that there are biases in AI, knowing that there are benefits to AI? What's our stake in all that? And again, please ignore the bit.ly at the bottom of the screen. So generally speaking, artificial intelligence, you might see flowcharts out there and Boolean logic. So that might say something like, if this happens, then that will happen. They are gigantic systems like that. So this is our definition for what is AI. Artificial intelligence, it's really computers that are using data, and the data sets are usually very, very large. They come from whatever people are inputting into the system, and they're making predictions and they're solving problems using mathematics. Basically, it's algorithms. And so they're predictive algorithms. Again, it's that kind of if then in much more complicated forms to make suggestions or solve problems for people. They rely on these data sets that are coming from historical data. So like, for example, ChatGPT, a lot of you be hearing about that lately. ChatGPT pulled from the internet. It pulled from social media. It pulled from books that were available free online to create its model. So when you start thinking about artificial intelligence, you really can't ignore where the information that's driving the system is coming from, who's inputting it, where are the sources coming from, and how might that impact the decisions that it's making. So in the past, we would have systems that would be guided to a certain extent by human beings. And now we're seeing computers kind of taking over more and more and more. All right. So Chris, I think this is your slide.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of bring up the idea and the notion, and we've been doing our research and talking to some AI developers from back 2009, and some of the things that we've been learning is, first off, artificial intelligence has really been around since 1950, and it's all through the algorithms. So just think about it this way. It's really integrated in our lives really seamlessly, and the way it personalizes it is, think of how we stream Netflix, Hulu, HBO, Spotify, and Pandora. It all tailors to our entertainment. We even utilize it when it comes to facial recognition. Once it's on our phones, it stores us in places. And also voice tech, it understands, but it also converses naturally sometimes with us, offering sometimes even intuitive suggestions. Think about also the self-driving cars. Those of you that might have a Tesla, and you pay a little extra to have that self-driving focus, or even drones and robots, they navigate. And what it does is it's like it has its own mind, really. We also have personal assistants, and we'll talk more about the personal assistants later on. There's going to be one that's going to be brought up that will all hold near and dear to us when it comes to Microsoft. But also think about like security, even like Google CAPTCHA, when it comes to making sure that the computer itself knows that we are an actual human being and not a robot, but we're still interacting with the AI like that. Think of early, even just AI spam filters that exist. Even think about Furby or even Tickle Me Elmo. Some of those things had algorithms, and you go back to it, it was like a this, if this, then that situation. In gaming, we also have situations like Pac-Man, the ghosts. They react intelligently, or I mean, if you were a Pac-Man expert or maybe even an esports enthusiast, that's another topic for another day. But there was different algorithms and different systems like, hey, I know the routine, and again, routine algorithm. So it's not just about understanding how these things, but we also want to make sure that we feel empowered, like, hey, you know what? AI is not going to take over the world. We're not over here concerned. We're not the next Sarah Connors over here having someone come and say like, hey, you come with me if you want to live. No, we're not going to fall into that situation. So, but it's important for us to be able to realize that how AI is being utilized. And I'd like to turn this next section over, because now that we see how it's utilized in our everyday life, now Jessica is going to explain to us how it's actually utilized even within the lives of our students and even in our own academic settings.
Yeah, before you take over, Jessica, really quickly, just a quick show of hands. How many of you use these things on a daily basis, or have really thought about the fact that AI is all around us at this point? Has anyone ever used yeah, I see some hands up, David. If you use your phone and it's recognizing your face, you know, that kind of blew my mind. How many of you had a Furby? I never did, but if you don't know what a Furby is, it would learn from you, and it would kind of be an engaging toy for kids. But I was really curious how many of you actually had a Furby. But, okay, I'll let you go, Jessica. Let me get you moved over now.
Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. All right. So bringing it back to education, give me a little thumbs up reaction if you use any of these at your sites. If you recognize something on this screen, give me a little thumbs up reaction, or you can drop a yes in the chat. Yeah, see a lot of thumbs ups. A lot of these are very common. Give me a different reaction if it surprised you that any of these are actually AI, or at least using AI technology. Maybe the little surprise face, or clapping hands or something. Yeah, so a few of you. Some of these were pretty obvious to me. Oops, can you go back now? Some of these were a little more understandable for me, obviously, like STAR assessments, Freckle, are personalized sort of standardized test software where they're testing students and then applying, we know that the test changes as students answer certain questions to gauge where they are and then applying that to different lessons. So that wasn't a huge shocker to me, but definitely some other things on there like Go Guardian. That was a new one for me, knowing that they use AI, and that's actually more of a security feature and sort of surveilling what kids are looking at, what they're using their computers for, looking for red flags that they could warn the school or the teacher about. And then, of course, I love Clippy up there. That's the throwback. I think that was for the Office suite, or I know it was on like every computer at some point in the 90s where Clippy was up. I think that was the first tech thing I helped my mom solve, which was like, how do I get rid of this paperclip always popping up for me? But that was our very first version of a personal assistant on our computers, right? And now we have Siri, which works a little bit better than Clippy sometimes. I'm not so sure. But an interesting thing to think about is that our students are growing up with these. I mean, some of these are in kindergarten classrooms. And so students today are not only digital natives, they're also going to be the first generation to grow up as AI natives. And when we were developing this presentation, I shared with some of my colleagues, it's always something I think about because I have a 20-year-old son and then a 4-year-old daughter. Big gap. But my 20-year-old son, if you were to ask him about life before the internet, he does have no concept of what that even means. Life without GPS, life without instant connection to your peers. It's never something he's had to deal with. And to think that in 16 years, my daughter and her generation might be in the same boat about AI, having to think how did people exist without these personal assistants and all this AI software doing all of these tasks for us and helping us and personalizing our learning? So just something to think about. It kind of blows my mind. And I'll turn it back to Pam.
All right, cool. I give you a little glimpse into this next slide. So as we're going through the examples today, there's two big ideas that I want you to kind of keep in mind. The first one is this notion of algorithmic bias that we've been kind of tossing around a little bit today. And then also that there's these access to the AI benefits that students need. We talked last week about access to computers. Again, it's that there's going to be a reason why students need to be able to identify AI, have worked with AI, understand AI in terms of their own futures. They can be AI natives, but do they actually know how to work and function, use it responsibly, all those things? And those same arguments for what we said about computers in general. We knew that we had to have students getting their hands onto technology so that they could build skills that they would need later when they enter the job force. Having the skill with AI is sort of that same idea. So there's a bit of a balance where you're thinking, I know that there's these issues in terms of the data and bias that can occur with an AI, but there's also a lot of benefits. So how, as an educator, do I think around that, and how do I balance that for my students? So just in terms of algorithmic bias, when you hear people talking about that, because AI goes around, it looks for patterns in these large data sets and it pulls these together. It makes decisions, and it can make decisions for how a student is tracked within a learning trajectory, right? If you're familiar with iReady, one of the first things that the students would do is they would go through and they would take a test, and the test would hone in on maybe gaps that the people, it was identifying and what it believes is the learning that is supposed to be taking place at a certain stage in your life. But it's all based on the data that it has that it's pulling from. So when we think about bias in that data, we're looking at a couple things. Where does the data actually come from that the companies are using? Is it based on a very Eurocentric realm of data? So if you think of the users of technology and which countries in the world have the most access to it, if they're pulling a lot of things from social resources, if they're pulling it from the internet, there can be biases in that and how it uses that information, then presents the information. So something to keep in mind is that this notion, I think a lot of computer scientists know it, they call it garbage in, garbage out, is you can have the best program in the world that can have all of the most wonderful intentions and plans for students and meaningful engagements for students, but it's only as good as the data that's being fed into it. So if you're feeding biased data into this best application, the results that come out can have biases in them. And we'll talk a little bit more about what some of those might look like and kind of get you on that path of thinking, where are they pulling this information? What are the algorithms based on? And how might it leave people out? So we always look, when we talk about bias, we look at who's included and who's excluded from it. And then again, in terms of access to AI, I touched on this a little bit, so I won't go too much into it. It's just that idea of we need, students are going to be exposed to it. So they're just like we had who has technology and who doesn't. More and more, we're going to be seeing this notion of who's been able to play around with AI, who's got access to Chat GPT and knows how to use it to enhance their writing rather than to do their writing for them. Those things can become equity concerns if some people are having those experiences and then others are not. All right, so this is my Carrie. Carrie, did you want to share your screen? I'll stop.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and we just want to preview for you some tools that you may use in relation to AI. Is everyone seeing my Perplexity screen? Perfect. So this is a tool called Perplexity, and Perplexity is an AI-powered search engine. It's similar to like a ChatGPT, OpenAI, which basically provides accurate answers to your questions, or relatively accurate answers depending on the data set that it's pulling from. And it's designed to generate answers and information for you and give you more information that's generated than a traditional search engine. So we put on there a couple of prompts, which you're welcome to try out. And I'm also going to just type them in. One thing to think about when you're using one of these generative AI tools is, what is it actually generating? And if I'm having my students use it, or if my students are using it for assignments, what are they actually generating and what are they learning from it? And so, for example, if I type in a 5-paragraph essay about the giver, which your students might be reading in middle school, so they're writing just a basic 5-paragraph essay, what would the outcome be? And if you look at what comes from this generative AI, what you get is a very well-written answer to the question. Now, as you read through this, you'll notice that there are certain things, including the vocabulary, the syntax, that maybe aren't exactly like your 6th grade students, your 7th grade students. It's not really reflective of the voices within your classroom. It also generally tends to have an American English voice to it rather than thinking about multicultural or multilingual experiences. So it's something to think about as you're giving these essays to students, if they're doing it at home, that are you really allowing them to give their accurate voice and assess the skills that they have based on that? Another prompt you could do to determine it would be, sometimes we like to use technology, and certainly AI is a great way to do this in some ways, use technology to differentiate for our students. And so something you might type in would be something like, simplify the text of The Raven, that's a common poem that's read, for an English learner. And so if I type that in, you'll notice that it shortens the text, but if you look at the vocabulary there, you still have really kind of traditional vocabulary that might be really difficult for an English learner. And so when you're starting to think about the differentiation, you really have to vet it and think about, is this actually helping to make it easier for my students, or is it just shortening it? And so those are some of those equity and AI issues that we're using it, and for differentiation, it can be great. But if you're thinking about what you can do with it, there are also certain things about how I can engineer a prompt. Prompt engineering is really important with this, to make sure that it's reflective of the students in my classroom. Does it reflect the levels, emerging, expanding of my learners? Does it actually do what I'm hoping it does, which is to simplify it. Maybe think about those strategies that you might use with creating visuals. Is it creating any visuals that help out with that learning? And so just as you're moving forward, thinking about what you can do to use this AI to make your job easier while also supporting equity and making sure that you're still allowing your students to have their own voice. And I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to one of my colleagues.
Do you want to keep sharing, Pam, and then I'll speak to the next slide?
Yes, thank you. I always have to be careful when I'm sharing. Are you actually seeing are you seeing my entire, no, you're seeing the screen. Got it.
Yeah, looks good. All right, so I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about Hello History, which you may have used. It's been around for a little while. It's an app for Android or Apple devices, so like iPads, but not necessarily a website. And what it is a chatbot app that uses ChatGPT-3 to allow students to like live chat with historical figures, fictional figures, people that they would be learning about in history or English class. Some of the potentials for this software is that it's very engaging for students. It's highly interactive. I mean, imagine being able to have a conversation with lots of people from the past, ask them the questions you want to know. It's personalized to that degree where they can lead the conversation, they can ask the questions they want to know in the moment that they're thinking about them, rather than just kind of like material that's presented in a textbook. So it does have potential to be a really useful tool, especially to make history really engaging and like real. But if you want to go to the next slide, Pam, some of the equity issues that exist were sort of like what Pam was talking about earlier, and the biases, concerns of where is this data coming from, who's feeding this AI, if you will, and what information is it going to give the students. And lots of articles have come out since this app came out that they've noticed that it tends to be apologetic for historical figures that were not necessarily apologetic about their actions in their real life, and also sort of glossing over some things that we would know as history teachers to be like major issues that we want the students to know about. It does give a disclaimer now. It didn't used to have this, but I've noticed recently it has this disclaimer at the bottom that says that these are based on online historical information, but there may be biases and inaccuracies, and lets users know to verify their facts. But just to give you one example, if I ran a chat with Christopher Columbus, when you ask him about his acts towards the indigenous people of the Americas, he just says that some things bring him pride and others fill him with regret. And if this is all the students had to know about Christopher Columbus, it would not necessarily paint the entire picture that we all know as educators, which brings us to a very important topic that Pam's going to launch into in a moment about teaching students to triangulate their facts and how important it is to fact check information that they're coming across online, whether it be from something they know is in AI or people that they think are, real. It's always important to check our facts, to present lessons in a way where students have multiple sources that they can check and verify, and get the full scope of history. And we had some really interesting conversations about this one for sure. I don't know if any of my team members want to jump in on Hello History.
Yeah, I was just going to go back one slide for a second, because I don't know if any of you noticed that we talk again about who's included, who's not included, and what do the creators of this program, behind all of these applications, are individuals, and they're the people inputting in who are or I'm assuming maybe some of this is AI, because when I look at who the people are that they are writing in as great world leaders, you kind of have to look at that with a little bit of suspicion, or a lot of suspicion, when Borat is showing up and we have Santa Claus and Barbie in there. I know they're listed in the fun area. It's not always clear, though, whether or not this is a real person. Are they being shown in a way that's reflective of the culture that they came from, or is it some AI's interpretation of what that culture would look like. Alicia, my boss, is not here today, but one of the things that she has done with us using AI to create images. And if you know Alicia well, her husband is Scottish and she is Hispanic, and their children are a mix of both cultures. So she's tried putting in, she has triplets too. So she's tried putting in triplets of Mexican and Scottish heritage. And what AI comes up with for her is a picture of three children with the exact same face. And then usually they've got some kind of a kilt on and maybe a sombrero. So these applications can be horribly inaccurate when it comes to how it creates and dreams up these images by pulling in information. And again, it's making associations across large data sets and interpreting it in the way that it thinks is appropriate. So when we're working with students, I really think you need to be the heart, you need to be the person in charge of that information with your kids. So it would be the adult teacher being the driver of how this information is being processed. All right, so I'm going to go forward a couple here real fast.
And one thing
yeah.
I might just interject is this is a really interesting opportunity in education for us to promote media literacy. And I know Jessica did touch on this, but the idea of even having these kind of experiences for your students and then tell me what was wrong about this experience. What wasn't accurate? Where can you check to learn? How can you cross-reference and fact check to find out which parts were true and which parts weren't? And that gets that critical thinking up, and it gives them exposure to how to differentiate and really understand what is actual and what's perspective based. Whose perspective is it coming from? Might there be another perspective that is coming from, or somebody else that's thinking something else in a different place, a different location? If you were asking someone who was Native American, would they be saying the same thing as Columbus? So getting those, there are two sides to the story, and understanding media literacy and fact checking, that this is a great opportunity for that too.
Yeah, Carrie, thank you for saying that, because we have had great conversations around that. And the fact that our students we talked about AI natives. This is going to become more and more. And how do you know who you can trust to give you a video that looks correct? And when is it, they call the when you switch faces on people, they call that a deep fake. When is it something that is a deep fake? When is it accurate? What are my sources that I can go to that are going to give me accurate information? These are things that students are going to need to know. Chris, I think you said something interesting, or when we had our conversations around, when does that historical inaccuracy become the tale that is told and people start to believe it? So again, I think as educators, by not talking about these programs, we do the disservice of students then running into them later in life and possibly believing everything that they're seeing on them, which seems outrageous for us to think of now. But I think we have histories, we have memories, we have books that we have read. Young students are not going to have all those experiences that adults today do, or maybe they will. I would hope that they do. I think this is your slide, Chris.
All right, thank you, Pam. So I want to show you now an overdub of what artificial intelligence did. I'm going to show you a lesson that I actually taught to my 6th grade class about 9 years ago. And this was a lesson taken from Engage in New York over ratios and rates. We'll just watch the first 20 seconds. And then after that, I'm going to show you what I did to overdub that. But I just want you to watch the first 20 seconds, just more or less to hear me read the prompt that I'm be reading in my class right now. And let's go. If you could play that, Pam, that'd be great. No, I think you might have to reshare. I don't know if did you click the share audio? Let's try that again. Okay. I appreciate everyone's patience. We're just resharing a different screen. as we're hearing this, I want you just listen. And listen intently. So let's try this again.
Right, Brad went to Gamer Realm to buy video games. Gamer Realm was having a sale, $65 for 4 games. He bought 3 games for himself and 1 game for his friend Diego. But Brad does not know how much Diego owes him for the 1 game. What is the unit price of the video games? What is the rate unit? All right, so what we know so far.
All right, let's go ahead and stop it right there. All right, we're going to play this next video. I want you to listen intently. I'm going to ask you after this, I'm going to ask you some questions of what you notice. So let's check this one out.
Muy bien, Brad fue a Gamer Realm para comprar videojuegos. Gamer Realm estaba de rebaja, $65 por 4 juegos. Compró 3 juegos para él y un juego para su amigo Diego. Pero Brad no sabe cuánto le debe Diego por el solo juego. ¿Cuál es el precio unitario de los videojuegos? ¿Cuál es la unidad de tarifa? Está bien, entonces sabemos hasta ahora. Es decir, hay dos
Okay, we can stop
personas.
it right there. If you can just do me a favor in the chat, can you just tell me anything that you notice? And if you're on the phone or anything, because you can't chat, if you feel comfortable to unmute yourself. But just let me know what do you notice between the overdub? I am a Spanish speaker, so but I can promise you I did not record and teach this lesson in Spanish. Again, like I said, this was done 9 years ago. All right, we see here in the chat. All right, so Carrie just put the question. So what do you notice between the overdubs? Anything in particular?
The differences between the two, you mean?
Yes. I mean, clearly it's
the-
a language difference, but anything?
So in the English version, it's segmented so that the listener can hear each of the aspects of the word problem.
Okay.
In Spanish, however, the assumption that the listener can understand at that rate of speech that the speaker is. So it's making it, the language is complex in Spanish, which conflates some of the requirements within the word problem. And the reason I'm able to say this is because I can speak and write in Spanish.
Suena bien. Muchas gracias. Great, thank you. Catherine writes here, the Spanish version uses correct mathematical terms. Yep, there you go. What about anything else? What about the tonations of my words? Anyone notice? Did it sound like me? Suena como cuando hablo español. Catherine felt like it did. Let's try it again, porque ahorita ya estoy hablando español. So vamos a jugarlo otra vez, nomás por unos 5 segundos.
Lucradas, Brad y Diego, que ambos están comprando un total de $65 en juegos y van a comprar 4 juegos. Sin embargo, Brad se quedará con 3 juegos.
Muchas gracias. Sin embargo, so there are certain things on here that I'm noticing that I'm like, I'm a little it's somewhat impressive, but thank you, Catherine. Yes, having the accent, but it's still good. I mean, when it comes to talking about giving students accessibility and giving students an opportunity. Now, I will say sometimes we're used to, and we've used Google Translate. Microsoft also has their version, which has been a little bit more accurate throughout the years. But one of the things that I found very powerful about this application was the very fact that it took as much as it was able to take as much as my tonation, my fluctuation with my words. I don't know if maybe I roll my R's when I speak English or not, but it was able to analyze that. And I just wanted to share this application, but I also want to pose some questions. So if you're interested in this, I will say, this is a paid app. I did pay $1 for the intro to it for a month. After that, I'm able to have over 30,000 or 300,000. I have to go back and look at the contract, but for $5 a month, you can have 30,000 words overdubbed. So it's just small little videos. The more you pay, of course, the more videos you can get translated. But I'm not here to try to sell a product. I just want you to see the power of what AI has done, even when it comes to translation and whatnot. But a couple things I want you to consider as we're looking at this. First off, the issue arises when certain languages and dialects can be inadequately represented in the data used for language technology. So think about accurate translations. Sometimes they could become a hurdle, especially for languages that don't receive a widespread of attention. So languages like Spanish, those languages are widely supported. but there may be other languages that may fall into the shadows because they have limited representations. Also, think about the spirit of the inclusive environments that we're trying to create within our classroom. We have to confront this bias, and the way to do that is thinking about, are our students being able to see themselves in this? So yesterday, our team, we kind of coined this quote, and we thought, like, we have to repeat this when we share this with you all. But the reality is, even with applications like this, there will be people who see themselves in these translations, but there will also be people that do not. So we really want to try to emphasize and encourage our students, students whose languages lack representation, they may feel excluded, they may feel unheard, and it could hinder. So we want to be sensitive, even when you utilize applications like this, getting a second opinion. I was a little hesitant to use any other language. I specifically stuck with Spanish because I'm a Spanish speaking individual myself. And last year when I was at Cajon Valley, a lot of my students there, they were a lot of Arabic speaking. So even then, knowing that if I were to use this app, having my network, having my supports, it's like, hey, how accurate is this? So it goes back to what we've been saying. We, even as teachers, and if we're producing these kinds of products, we have to produce it with a critical eye and with that notion of like, okay, it's really questioning everything for that. So at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that we're providing access for our students, but then also providing a way where it's that bias that's in there, we're still also questioning that. So I just thought it'd be cool to share a really cool app. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But it's just to see how the power of artificial intelligence now is taking, even when it comes to changing our voices to other dialects and other languages.
You have a quote. Somebody put something in the chat for you if you want to look at that real quick.
Catherine said there are many students that do not want to turn on their microphones or record themselves because they do not want
Brad went to Gamer Realm to buy video Brad games. Fue a Gamer Realm para comprar videojuegos.
It's all good. Felt like Inception there for a moment there. So, all right. There are many students that do not want to turn on their microphones or record themselves because they do not want to hear themselves. This gives them a tool to use to participate. That's actually a very good point. In addition to that, Catherine, you could also think there are opportunities where students maybe want to utilize like the text to speech. Maybe if they record their own voice, then so I didn't think about that. That's a great way of looking at one. Any video generative AI, that I have not dove as much into, but
I just put one in the chat, Chris.
Okay, go for it.
I just put in the chat, Zapier is one, and most of them, if you look on them, are freemiums. So you have a certain amount of usage depending on the plan that you have. But Zapier is an interesting one to check out. There's also Synthesia. I can type that into the chat too. And we are going to be doing a session a little bit later in November, and during that we'll talk about some productivity tools for teachers, and we'll be including some of those video tools too. So.
Yeah, so something to add on to what you were talking about, Chris, I don't want to go back to the previous slide because I'm afraid the videos will launch on that slide, but with that those translations, something that I had read about that made me think a lot around how the translations happen is, we know that there are languages that have kind of a generic verbs are all similar, and then there are languages like Spanish and Italian where you have the male and the female versions of different words and phrases. And so that's something else to look at if you know the languages, is are languages, like, when are they choosing male, when are they choosing female, if it's not necessarily already put into the text. Like, if you know the context, perhaps you can make those choices as AI, but if it's just defaulting, is it always defaulting to the male kind of language, or depending on context? So if you're talking about shopping, is it going to default to a feminine version of the language? I don't know. Those are just questions that people have right now. And then, like Chris said, even within languages, we know that there are different dialects. So are all the dialects the same for Spanish? Are you always going to be hearing, something that is sounding more like you might hear if you're in Mexico versus Brazil, or versus Brazil, I think they speak Portuguese, but Spain. Are you going to have different ways of hearing it? And I have seen some um, programs coming out lately where they try to give variation for that. There's a program called Speechify that will read your writing out loud. It's a Chrome app, and I think there's other places. And I have been noticing they are beginning to include different dialects even within a language. So that's kind of an interesting approach that's happening. But those are all things to talk about with students as well. Again, if you're using the technology, we don't want to say don't use it, but we are saying how you use it then becomes important, and what kind of conversations, and are you pointing out to the students, you do know that a computer system is pulling this all together right now, and there could be problems with it, could be problematic, but you're going to see this throughout your life. So now let me help you think around what might be happening here. So we're getting close to our time, so I'm going to keep moving here. But along with those notions of then algorithmic bias, and we have kind of wanting students to be able to use it, we get to this notion of, okay, well, when we're using programs that have AI, and we are aware that they could be biased, that they could be tracking students into lower levels of robustness in their learning, just simply based on not knowing the students, but what is standardized according to somebody's algorithm somewhere. How do we then work against this with our students? And I think it all comes back to this notion of good teaching that we have learned and we have known all along, which is that there is a teacher in there. We are not machines. We get to know our students. We know them as individuals. We know what they're capable of. And if the only thing, and this was what kind of this image here represents, that you're using to assess your students is one essay or a few essays or just something that they might have created off the computers, then that's where you're going to fall into some of these traps even harder. If you're putting them on Khan Academy and letting them sit there and that's what they're doing all day, there has to be more multimodality. There has to be more ways that I go back to my universal design for learning, multiple means of expression, multiple means of engagement, and multiple ways of kind of consuming the information. There's another one in there I always forget because it's representation. Thank you. The way that you're seeing the information. So we know that part of what you can do is begin to triangulate. If you're working against systems that might be creating writing for your students, then you're going to have them come in and do writing old school, get out those blue books that we all know about from when we were young, and have them give you a sample of their handwritten writing, have them talking in class, have them, we know we can podcast, we know we can make videos, we know we can share information in lots of different ways. Make sure that there is a human element. I call it the heart. So you'll see my next little symbol here. Make sure that there's a human element within what you're doing with students. You can incorporate the AI, you can take advantage of the AI. And sometimes as a teacher, it can give you very quick information and data, but take that with that grain of salt and really think to yourselves, is this the best placement for my student? Or do I have other information about them that allows me to say, the student is brilliant and articulate. When you talk to them, I can tell that they're getting the content. They might not be speaking it perfectly. They might not be able to write it perfectly. And keep all of that in mind in terms of learning. Are they communal learners? Are they is there something about the AI? It's very individualistic, right? You're sitting down, you're doing something alone. That kind of individual learning is a very Eurocentric way of learning. It's this communal idea, learning together, trying things out, that is more indicative of other cultures. Bring that in. We know that that's good teaching for all students. So the Department of Education came out with a pamphlet, and I given you that resource toward the end of the slide deck if you're interested in it. But I really like the way that they give a kind of conceptual idea of this notion of the heart. They said it's basically like, think of AI as a scooter bike. not a random, Roomba robot going around making its own decisions with no one caring really what it's doing. We want it to be like an electrified scooter where there is a human being driving it, and that is fully aware and fully in control, but maybe their burden is less. Maybe there are efficiencies. Carrie said we're going to be doing a class on AI and teacher efficiencies. How can it help you? Pretty soon. But again, we always want to make sure we're kind of in that driver's seat and that we don't take a back seat. I know I'm going to be the lady someday with my grandkids in the car, huddling in the back while they're playing ping pong going down the freeway or something, and I'll be in the back going because it will be driverless. But um, keep human beings in there. We need us. All right. The Department of Ed also came up with, this is sort of where the conversation is going now, with between educators, industry that might be creating programs for students now. There are lots of, I would say, even within the last 5 years, people are talking a lot about algorithmic bias and how to counteract it and how to make sure that the data sets are more reflective of the different cultures, not only within the United States, but worldwide, and making sure that, we are not setting a premium on one way of thinking, one way of learning, one way of being and knowing. And so they're really wanting to emphasize this idea of humanity in the loop, aligning everyone so that we have a shared vision. So if you're going to go out and create an app now, they are highly encouraging you to bring educators in so that you learn different ways of teaching, and you're not having a programmer who said, well, I was in school 30 years ago, this is the way I learned, therefore it should be a great way to learn. You want people to bring in new ideas and make sure that that's happening as you're creating these programs. I think the other one in here that I thought was interesting was developing education specific guidelines and guardrails. So you notice that Jessica had said they did begin to create, this Hello History was very clearly created for education and for students to be engaging with. And they're putting in the warning signs now of, hey, be aware that there may be inaccuracies in here, which, can cue in students to say, oh, maybe I should take a second look at this. So these things are happening now. I think this might be a good place to stop. Does anyone have any? We probably should have stopped and asked this earlier, but are there any questions or things that anyone would like to share, or things that you've been thinking about in this area, or thoughts that you have right now? I'll give a minute for people to think. Yeah, you said just like wiki pages used to be. Thank you, Zerla, put that in the chat. I remember there was something about a teacher who created a post on wiki pages that was about, I don't know, it was like, I think I'm saying it wrong here, but the Burmese mountain dog. It was just his dog. He put in all this information. It was completely inaccurate. And he was showing his students, look, anybody can do this. So I wouldn't say anybody can create an AI program right now, but it is getting to the point where a lot of people are taking large language models like ChatGPT and attaching it to programming that has already existed. Any other questions? Okay. So as a department, we do have a few more events coming up, and if you're interested, you can always click on the slides and you have access to these. You can go to our website too. It's just at the County Office of Ed. If you start, the easiest way to get there is sdcoe.net/edtech, but you can always find us just doing a quick little search under educators. We have our Curious About series coming up, and the next one is the AI for productivity. And then we also have in January an accessibility network. So that's Carrie, I think you know a little bit more about that, but that's also AI and accessibility in the other term of accessibility rather than just, do you have a computer in your hand? Did you want to say anything, Carrie, real quick?
Sure. So that one's really going to focus on how you can use AI for differentiation and thinking about what you can do to think about your students' specific learning differences, learning challenges, and just your learners in general, and then recognize how you can use AI to provide you with supports while also triangulating and making sure that you're meeting the needs of your learners. So just kind of those things that will be beneficial to them while not taking away the human element.
Thank you. Yeah. Amber, you just put in the chat that you saw someone who had an AI bot attend a Zoom session. We were actually playing with an AI bot and we didn't realize that I don't know if this was you attending our session, but it just popped on and yeah, it started taking notes for us and we didn't realize it was going to come in automatically. So we have since turned that off. But I think we'll see that more and more that, sometimes it gets a little hard to tell if it's a person or a bot. So we have to be sort of aware that they could be out there now. Let me get to the next slide. So again, we have other events coming up. We do a Computers to Kids event, which is a computer giveaway. We have some learning and innovation summits coming up. I'm not going to go through and read all of these. If you're interested in them, please check them out on these slides. You can click on links and it'll take you to different events that we have going on. I also put in the last resource here, which was from the Department of Education, and it's all about artificial intelligence and how that affects education. It was a good read if you'd like to have access to that. And at this point, we're at 5:54, and I don't think I've ever heard of anyone complaining about ending a session early. But I want to thank you all for coming and taking the time to have these chats with us and learn about AI. We are in the process of learning around equity specifically within our department. So sometimes it's a little scary to get out here and begin talking around a subject that we are learning about, but don't feel anywhere near experts on. We're experts on technology, but we are just starting to think around these issues and how they affect the edtech world. So we appreciate that you came to join us today and kind of start having these conversations. Thank you, everybody. I see some thank yous in the chat.